Hey everyone, welcome to another video. We're in the back shop today. We're going to tear down a 4L60E out of a 2005 Sierra. It's going into a 2005 Tahoe. This thing's been sitting on the shelf for the last year as a customer core trade-in, so we're going to go ahead and build it up for another customer. Now, I suspect this transmission is a basket case. It's got a country miles worth of front end play and about the same in the rear, so should be an adventure, so to speak. So Torx plus 50 on your bell housing bolts. Like that one got stripped. Alright, the remedy here is to simply cut the head off of the bolt. I'm going to have to do that off camera, but yeah, that sometimes happens, unfortunately. Those things are very, very weak, and your technique is not absolutely perfect, which on that particular bolt, mine was not. You know, you can expect things like that to happen, unfortunately. All right. Servo cover snap ring off, and then we'll get the servo cover off. Do what you can to try and get the O-ring exposed. And yeah, I know the snap ring's on the ground. We'll have to pick it up later. All right, get in behind it with a pick, and then yank it out. Alright, looks like we have the standard 553 servo. That's what comes in all of the non-Corvette or high-performance V6 and V8 applications. The real small displacement engines that had these transmissions had the 554 servos. They're not as common. Alright, harness. You just break the tabs. No biggie. Get the pump bolts out. So 13mm on your pump bolts. Same with the hand bolts, 13mm. Stubborn. Yep, complete disaster. I'm gonna keep this crap in the center because this table is actually not set up yet for proper drainage of fluid. So everything on here as far as bolts is gonna be 10mm except for these 3 bolts. They got to go back in the exact same place. You got 2 8mm bolts here for the pressure switch manifold assembly, and then underneath you have 3 8mm bolts for the reverse hold down plate. So you have one 13mm bolt for your detent roller and spring. And then your 1-2 accumulator housing is also going to be 10mm. Most of these will have plastic pistons installed, so you're going to want to change those out. There's a plastic piston, I think. Yep, plastic. So you want to change that to an aluminum piston so that you don't risk it breaking when it goes back together. There's a lot more fluid than I anticipated, so to use a lot more towels than I would have preferred to use. All right. It's got an 04 valve body. To be honest, any valve body, 96 up through 06 will work. The TCC regulator isolator valve train underwent a couple of minor design revisions in 2000 or 2001. And frankly, they're not super critical. In other words, if you run a 96 valve body as is in an 02 or 03 application, it'll work just fine. It's not that big of a deal. Alright, standard accumulator spring configuration. In either 06 or 07, they went to a single small inner spring. So they did away with the large outer spring. And a slight recalibration of that circuit. Alright, 3 8mm bolts. We'll get these two first. And then our 3 here. That should allow us to remove the valve body. Okay, pressure switch manifold, like all the rest of the electronics, should go right in the trash. Do not reuse that stuff. It's going to be 7 check balls in the valve body. If you are so inclined, you can leave out the number 6 check ball. That's the coast clutch flow control check ball. So if you're doing something high performance, off-road, or heavy duty towing, hauling, working, it may be a good idea to just leave that out. This thing had a lot more fluid in it than initially thought. So I have quite a job here cleaning up mess. Okay, Transgo makes a 96 to 06 separator plate that can be ran in all applications for those years, and then they got a separate one for 2007, 2008, as well as 2009 and up. They also make one for 93, 94, and 1995, which is technically a standalone year for these transmissions, though I've seen numerous occasions where these things would come in for burnt 3/4 clutch, or some other common pattern failure or issue, and otherwise be working perfectly fine with mismatched components, like the wrong valve body or wrong separator plate, etc., for whatever year the transmission happens to be. Hey, note the check ball stuck in a plate. This is the 1-2 check ball location. Very, very common in these transmissions, 4L60E specifically, to see this happen. So this plate will have to be drilled out at this location with a 1/4-inch drill bit, and then fitted with a repair sleeve. And that's assuming there's nothing else seriously wrong with the plate. You can always replace the plate as well with either a good compatible factory used one or a Transgo 4696 plate. And as I mentioned, they will work for any years 96 to 06. Okay, 4th accumulator piston. You can leave that out if you want and block off the 4th accumulator passage. It's down here in the bore. It feeds through this location here. So if you're having problems getting the piston out, you can put air in here. Just put like a rag or something, and that'll get it out for you. Always replace these pistons, never go back with them. This one I think is oblonged in the bore anyway. Okay, your 4th accumulator check ball. The rest of them are down there somewhere, or in the muck. Okay, 15 millimeter on that nut. For your selector shaft rooster comb nut. This wants to drain in the front like this. And 13 millimeter on your parking pole guide plate. Down there, you've got to get an extension for it. why this is not going there. Somebody put a different bolt. Nope. Angle just wasn't perfect, that's all. I got the bench cleaned off a little bit, and I was also able to remove the bell housing. I just simply used a Dremel. You know, went right in at the bolt, cut the head off basically, separated it with a chisel. Once I had enough of the bolt cut through, I wasn't able to make it all the way through, but you know, quick chisel and hammer, and then you know, you saw the little clip of me smacking the bell housing repeatedly until, you know, kind of separated and forced its way past that, you know, what remained of the bolt head. So messy, but the main thing is I was able to get it off. And the little nicks on the bell housing are not material. They're not going to hurt anything. So it's not really a concern per se. Structurally, there won't be any concerns, any issues with using that bell housing, though I think I have another one. I may switch it out just to be on the safe side. That band's all sorts of screwed up. Alright. Reverse input clutches look okay. Not too bad. Same with the steels, they look okay. The bottom steel. And backing plate, clutch bearing surface looks pretty decent. Alright, this bearing is still intact. I would expect it to have collapsed, but it did not, so that means that the reason for the excessive end play is somewhere further inside the case. Number 68 washer, this is one of the thinner ones. I think 67 or 66 is the thinnest available. Alright, so I get that Planetary out, 90-degree snap ring pliers, and here's the reason for the excessive end play. This bearing collapsed. So they completely disintegrated. You get all the needle bearings coming out of the pinions, and this thing's wasted. Actually, it's not coming out of the pinions; it's coming out of what remains of this thrust bearing here. So this planet is no longer one unified piece. So this typically happens due to insufficient, lube or restrictions in the system, causing planetary failure. So this transmission was rebuilt before. You see a hardened and heat-treated sun shell here. And judging by the wear on the shell, at least here at the splines where the heat treatment is, there's not many miles on it. Another cause potentially for something like this is excessive front end play to begin with. And this bearing's actually not too bad a shape. That bearing's okay as well. Frost washer is intact. See what sun gear looks like. Sun gear looks in good shape. Alright. See where the ends of the snap ring are. They are straddling the anti-clunk spring. That's what you want. You don't want to see the snap ring overlapping either end because that puts the unit at risk. Basically it puts the snap ring at risk from popping all the way out because it's reacting against that clunk spring and the clunk spring will force it out. So you don't want that, obviously. Alright. Get this case empty real quick. I didn't want that to come all the way out like that. Unfortunately, we're going to have to beat on it. More violent than I had intended for it, but this is what it is. We got check balls. There's your anti-clunk spring. Okay, so hold the inner race and spin the center support counterclockwise. You should lock clockwise. Low roller clutch failure in these units is not common. This is the low roller clutch assembly. They're usually pretty resilient. You don't see them bad too often. Sorry for the reach over. Okay, let's take a look at our low reverse clutch. I think I did that. I don't believe that's, something that was happening inside the case, but there is some wear on these frictions. Not a terrible amount, but there is some. The steels look good. And the steel's looking in very good shape. Hopefully I didn't damage the rear planet. Okay, it looks to be in decent shape. Bearing seems okay. Okay, Okay, we're not going to reuse this output shaft because we're going to be converting this to a two-wheel drive application, but the output shaft itself seems to be okay. One thing you want to check is splines, especially if there's a planetary failure. Sometimes it will take out the output shaft splines. You'll see chips, some splines will be fractured, so output shafts are plentiful. There shouldn't be any concerns about not being able to get another one. Same with here, you want to check these splines, check your teeth obviously. And then the last thing we need to remove is the low reverse piston and return spring assembly. So we see some remnants of that front planet and the needle bearings. I mean, when that needle bearing comes apart, that Torrington bearing I should say, I mean it does a lot of damage. For the wedge seal, hammer on it and then take it out. Okay, new wedge seal will come in the kit. Alright, let's take a look at the pump and the clutches in the forward drum. We have to pressure test that drum to see if it's going to be any good or not. Let's take a look at the pump. Want to make sure you're in the shot. So 13 millimeters on the 5 pump half bolts. Most of these pumps are going to need some sort of reconditioning work. It's rare that you get one in that, where both working surfaces are fine and, it's still within spec as far as the rotor and slide to pump body deck surface clearance. I mean, usually you got like 3,000, sometimes 4,000s, and the surface is heavily warped. Again, I want to make sure that everything is visible. So, a lot of builders will reuse these vanes. I'm not a huge fan of that, especially you can get a whole vane kit for $5 or less and a rotor guide for like $2. So if you're going to reuse your rotor, check here. This is where they like to crack. And vanes go in the trash. The rings will occasionally break, and that will cause failure of the pump. It'll be catastrophic. But what usually causes pump failure in very high mileage or otherwise hard use units, and this is not as well known, what usually will cause failure is the balance spool of the pressure regulator valve here in this location. When this is really, really worn, that will cause irregularities and instability in the rotor and slide pocket and ultimately lead to rotor and slide failure. So again, not as well known, but you always want to check for that so that you don't inadvertently go back with a unit, spend all the time and money rebuilding it only to have the rotor and slide break up because the inboard spool's bore here in the pump cover is irreparably worn out. It has been a sloppy teardown, I admit, but got the thing apart. Working surface needs to be remilled. This working surface isn't too bad, to be perfectly honest. I'm not expected to see much worse. You got some scoring right in here, But if this is really, really light and you're on an extreme budget, you can actually clean this up with some sandpaper. I would go maybe 600 grit and then 800 to 1000 grit. And that will get it, you know, to the point where it's usable in a factory or mild performance application. If you're doing high performance, you really need to go with fresh working surfaces, you know, freshly machined on both the stator support as well as the pump body. Alright, I'm just trying to keep this fluid corralled. I need to weld a trough all the way around this bench. So that's going to be my next priority. Alright, 3/4 clutch obviously looks smoked. And looks like we have some damage here, so you can see the drum is damaged. There's honestly no point in testing it at this juncture because we're not going to reuse this drum. You see how it's been structurally compromised. You know, the material here is very thin, so it's no good. Where is my ring ends? So I have plenty of these drums. I'll just put another one in. I mean, you see how easily that came out. And the release springs. So these two plates here, the apply plate and the backing plate, are no good. So this is very common. Coned frictions. So that's how vulnerable the 3/4 clutch is in these transmissions. Every single one of these frictions is coned. Alright, gotta change battery out and then we'll continue. Alright, fresh battery in. And the steels are smoked. Steels, friction, pressure, and backing plate, all gone. These low release springs are no good. Chuck them out. And then looks like we have more damage to look at, so alright, so forward spray rotation, when you're holding it like this, it should spin freewheel clockwise and lock counterclockwise. So it's got a little bit of heat soak in here, but if the lugs are in good shape, I mean, heat's not going to matter. And there's the bearing. Goes like this. Looks like 4 clutches are smoked. So major damage to the backing plate as a result of that bearing failure. And then you have your frictions, your steels, they're no good. That one looks marginal. See all the scoring in the steels, some heat marks. No good. And the wave plate's probably fine. It doesn't look too worse for wear. But none of this stuff is any good. It has to be shocked. And there I'm referring to everything in the forward clutch. So let's see what the coast clutch looks like. Yeah, not too bad. Alright, that backing plate looks okay. And And these steels at first glance look okay as well. And again, I say first glance because you're not really going to do an inspection at this point. You're going to do your inspection once everything's cleaned up, but this transmission unfortunately has been through the ringer. So just a lot of sludge. Obviously you would never reuse your one-way assembly. Main thing is you want to make sure that both of these races are in good shape. So this race should be mirrory smooth and free of defects. Shouldn't be any kind of scoring or gouging, no bluing from heat. Scrutinize the teeth on the gear. Again, first glance looks okay. For your outer race, there should be cross hatching. So we have a lot of sludge and clutch material, but once we get rid of it, we see that it's got a little bit of wear to it, but it still has some cross hatching. Some 400 grit sandpaper going over it a bunch of times will make that surface good again. So not too bad there. Alright, so you have your return spring assembly and your bonded pistons. They would all get replaced. This whole drum's going into the scrap bin. Nothing's going to be reused. So last thing we need to do is get the low reverse piston out of the case. Alright, sometimes the return spring assembly will get stuck. I smack it with a hammer handle and it'll come right out. Alright, and then you're going to come in here at the low reverse speed with your compressed air, and you're just going to punch the piston out. The tripod right in the way of everything, so poor camera placement on my part. Sorry about all the noises. There we go. Alright guys, that's a teardown. So obviously very sloppy, very messy. And this transmission itself was a basket case. So you got to see firsthand what happens when a Torrington bearing fails in one of these units, especially the Torrington bearings in the gear sets. And in this case, it's nothing short of cataclysmic. It took out both drums, the front planet, ring gear, and reaction shaft, scored up the pump heavily, and also took out the sun shell. And I only mention that not because we would reuse sun shells, but because that shell was installed, I would say, not more than 20,000 miles ago. So this unit was rebuilt relatively recently. So what could have caused this? I mean, there could be any number of things, right? Lack of maintenance, ran low on fluid, lubrication restrictions in the system, you know, one thing leading to another. Maybe it was just simply ridden hard and put away wet one too many times, or all of the above, right? You know, you got to maintain your transmission, you got to keep an eye on fluid levels and condition, and you got to service it. I would recommend not more than every 30,000 miles on a 4L60E, especially an older one that's running Dex 3. There's another possibility as well, and as I mentioned, this transmission I believe was rebuilt relatively recently, and that possibility is that when the builder went back with it, he did not set end play to within specification. He allowed way too much. So max is 35 thousandths for front end play, and the 4L60 and 700R4 are what I call pass-through case, meaning there is no separate front and rear gear train in play. The entirety of the rotating assembly, all the guts therein, thrust against the back of the case and the rear of the stator. So if the case is too loose, you're going to have all these parts moving aggressively against each other and against all the Torrington bearings throughout the unit. And if you have enough play, those bearings are going to get battered over and over and over again. And I think that might be the case here. I think that the end play was set to probably 50 or 60 thousandths of an inch. It had the second or third thinnest selective thrust washer there that goes underneath the front stator to input drum thrust bearing. And my guess is that it was set up with probably in excess of 50 thousandths worth of end play. And you combine that with maybe, aggressive driving, not maintaining the vehicle or whatever, maybe it was raced, who knows, I have no idea. Bottom line is it's not going to last very long. That bearing or those bearings are going to just get hammered until they eventually fail. And once that happens, then you have a domino cascading effect that leads to the catastrophe that we have here in front of us. So I think that's what happened, but it's impossible to say for sure. All I know is this thing's going to need quite a lot of hard parts. So anyway, as always guys, thanks so much for watching. This wasn't my best work. This bench is really not suited as is for teardowns, but I'm going to weld a trough all the way around it so we can corral all that fluid and channel it nicely into a bucket like the bench in the front shop. So going to be doing more back shop videos. Stay tuned, and thanks again for watching. Look forward to seeing you on the next one.